Hello, and welcome to the Appalachian Regional Commission's training video on understanding match for ARC grant applications. This is the overall flow of completing the budget and match sections of your project. In general, budget development is a component of project development that should take place in the planning phase of a project. First, you want to develop your project budget. Through that process, you'll determine your total project cost. After that, you identify the maximum that ARC can contribute to the project. Then you identify and secure your applicable match share. So what is match? It's the non-ARC funding or resources that contribute to project costs. Match is a required component of most ARC grants. The percentage of required match is based on the economic status designation of all counties impacted by project activities. Each year, ARC assigns an economic status to each of the 423 counties in the Appalachian region. This economic status determines the match rate for the projects for that year. Here's a map of the county economic statuses for the ARC region for FY 2025. Updated match rates for these counties can be found at www.arc.gov. First, let's talk about match sources that are acceptable for ARC grants. Match can be from the applicant, from local, state, and federal grants, from foundations, and from the public or private sectors. Acceptable match types are cash and in-kind. Finding and securing match can be a challenging experience for some applicants. Let's come up with some creative ways to make your match rate. Here are some possible examples of cash match. Cash match can come from the applicant, banks and financial institutions, the IRS, and private contributions. Let's look at some examples for each of these. First, cash match from the applicant. Cash match can come from the applicant in the form of savings or capital, program income, or the unused percentage of the indirect cost rate. How you can use this for an ARC grant application is to note it in appropriate places in the application, for example, in the budget. In fact, it must be included in the approved budget. Now let's talk about match from banks and financial institutions. You can attribute cash match in the form of loans, whether traditional, bridge, or revolving loans. How you can use this as ARC match is to provide documentation for it and note it in appropriate places in the application. It must be included in the approved budget. Returning to our cash match sources, let's discuss Internal Revenue Service cash match. You can apply this cash match in the form of tax credits. For example, direct or elective pay tax credits. These can be a reliable source of reimbursement for some match. If you elect to use this method, you would need to find bridge funding to contribute to the project while awaiting your tax return. Finally, let's look at some examples of private contributions. This type of match is cash from private donors, for example, from fundraising campaigns or platforms, or from corporate donations or grants. In order to use this type for ARC match, you'll need to secure the money, document it, and provide a letter of commitment for it from the match source. Now let's discuss cash match coming from other different types of grants. Grants can come from the federal, state, or local government, or from philanthropic organizations. We'll give examples of each of these. First, from the federal government. Examples of federal grants include the Economic Development Administration, or EDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, and the Department of Energy, DOE. ARC is able to accept other federal grants as match. In order to use grants from these entities as match for ARC projects, ensure the other federal agency is okay with their funds being used as match in an ARC project and ensure that the timing lines up. Now let's move on to talk about state government grants. Examples of state match include the CDBG braided funding program. The ARC state program manager in your state is a great resource to work with to identify the best sources of match and to align timing of the match with your ARC project. Now let's talk about local government grants. Examples of local government grants include county grant programs and grants from local or regional organizations. Examples include specialized grants for match and targeted grants for special initiatives. How to utilize this in an ARC project is to secure the funding and then obtain documentation for the ARC grant application. Finally, let's discuss philanthropic grants. These can come in the form of foundation grants, for example, from the Benedum Foundation or the Just Transition Fund. How to use these for ARC Match is to secure funding and obtain documentation. Now we're going to talk about in-kind match sources. In-kind match can come from the applicant or from a non-federal third-party entity. In-kind match can take many forms. It's the value of direct and indirect costs to the project. For example, personnel, property, space, and goods and services. Examples of services include training for project staff, professional or expert services for the project, and staff and volunteer time on the project. Examples of goods include equipment rental or donation value, and the value of donated materials and supplies. Examples of property and space include real property like land or buildings and rental value. You can use in-kind match in your project application by determining the value of it according to the Code of Federal Regulations 2 CFR Part 200. The way you assess the value must be put in your budget narrative. Now, here are some tips on valuing your in-kind match. First, when it comes to property, there are specific regulations regarding its valuation. Consult these federal regulations to help you assign value to the property. The value of donated space must be less than or equal to the value of comparable space in the same locality based on an independent appraisal. Second, when it comes to services and staff time, in-kind needs to be valued based on the regular current pay plus the applicable percentage of fringe benefits and correspond to the amount of time contributed to the project. The value of volunteer services needs to be consistent with the rates of pay for similar work within your organization or within the labor market. You can include allowable fringe benefits in the calculation of staff and volunteer time. Finally, when it comes to equipment and supplies, the value of donations in this space must be less than or equal to the fair market value or rental value for the same type of material, including its age and condition. This value should be calculated at the time of donation. You'll notice a theme that keeps popping up is that in-kind match generally needs to be valued at the fair market value of that good or service, what others would ordinarily pay for a similar good or service of the same age or condition in the general market. So now let's recap what we covered in this video. First, finding and securing match is an important step in developing your project budget. It can come in different forms and from a variety of sources. You can get creative about how you can meet your match rate. For example, using tax credits or campaign revenues for cash match, and using expert or volunteer donated time for in-kind match. Here's some contact information for ARC in case you may need it. If you have any follow-up questions or need further assistance, please reach out to us. Thank you for watching.